The message coming out of China is getting louder by the day. It doesn't like other countries, especially Australia, ganging up and meddling in its affairs. As we know, Beijing is currently doing its best to punish us economically, but in the last few days, President Xi Jinping has also ratcheted up the rhetoric by warning of the perils of a new Cold War. A loose translation is, if we don't stop poking the panda, we'll face serious consequences. Now, it's worth taking that threat seriously because Xi controls the largest military force in the world. And as one of his supporters cautions tonight, the cost of conflict with China could be Armageddon. It's a prospect as terrifying as it is unthinkable. A military showdown between two nuclear-armed superpowers, the United States and China. A conflict that could reshape the world order. Is Australia vulnerable at the moment?
Australia is monstrously vulnerable at the moment. We have this naive faith that American military power is infinite, and it's not.
Tonight, leading minds on the looming war with China.
It's going to be waged on an economic front. It's going to be waged on a social affairs front. They're going to come at us all ways.
How likely is it? How prepared are we? And at what cost for us and the world?
Use all your imagination. Think about all the nightmares you can think of. And what will happen will be 10 times more than your worst nightmare. You are talking about the possibility of Armageddon.
Taipei is a modern metropolis, capital of Taiwan, an island half the size of Tasmania, yet home to a population just about the same as all of Australia. The trigger point for conflict with China, if it comes, is right here. Why do you think people in Australia should care about what's happening in Taiwan right now?
Because we are a democracy, and democracy do not survive in isolation.
Xin Cheng Xiao is an entrepreneur who runs a tech startup in Taipei. In recent months, he's grown increasingly nervous about China's growing threats to reunify with Taiwan, by force if necessary. What is it particularly about Chinese rule that you're scared of?
Number one is losing all your freedoms, right? Because Taiwan has been enjoying, our democracy and our liberties, our freedoms for the past few decades. And it is just unimaginable that, we would be reunified with an authoritarian regime and then surrender such freedoms. So, no, it's not an option.
For Xiao and many other Taiwanese, the crackdown on democracy in nearby Hong Kong is a warning of what may be to come.
They lost their basic right to vote, to elect their officials, to speak their minds, to protest. Hong Kong people just live under fear every single day. So we all hope that it doesn't come to this, right? Because Taiwanese would have to fight. And although we spend heavily on military equipment, we are no match for the second largest army in the world.
China is increasingly vocal about bringing what it views as a renegade province to heel, stepping up its warnings to the rest of the world not to meddle in its business.
Anyone who dares try to do that will have their heads bashed bloody against the Great Wall of Steel, forged by over 1.4 billion Chinese people.
President Xi Jinping's hard line at the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party in July was followed by a record number of Chinese fighter planes breaching Taiwanese airspace, more than 150 incursions over just a 4-day period. The question is, if China does make a move on Taiwan, will the US respond? Right now, the answer seems to be yes.
I just want to make China understand that we are not going to step back. We are not going to change any of our views.
So are you saying that the United States would come to Taiwan's defense if China attacked?
Yes, we have a commitment to do that.
Those who want to block China's unification with China's Taiwan will be doomed to failure.
Victor Gao is an expert in Chinese affairs and an unofficial mouthpiece for the regime in Beijing. Vice President of the Centre for China and Globalisation think tank, he's a former diplomat who was the interpreter for Communist leader Deng Xiaoping. If the US does intervene in Taiwan and Australia supports them, what will happen to Australia?
Listen, if Australia goes to fight together with the US soldiers in China's drive for reunification between China's mainland and China's Taiwan, then you are talking about the worst thing you can dream of. A war between China and the United States will soon escalate out of control, and that will be Armageddon, Armageddon, and Armageddon. And this is what I hope the Australian people will come to realize, that you need to deal with China with respect as much as you give to the United States.
Through simulated invasions, China has been showing off the military might it could unleash if Taiwan puts up a fight. At the sprawling Zuraha training base in Inner Mongolia, troops are schooled in street-to-street combat in a mock Taipei. As you can see from these satellite images and from these photos, there's even a building with an extraordinary resemblance to Taiwan's presidential headquarters. It's all designed to send a message. We are armed, we are ready, and we can make a move whenever we want.
Let the Chinese people do their mission. Let China's mainland unite with Taiwan, and that will make the Chinese, the Americans, the Australians, and mankind as a whole happier and safer.
You said Australia should show China more respect, but it sounds to me like you want Australia to kneel down before China and fear them.
Absolutely not. I think China probably at the heart is a country of pandas. Do you really want to fear panda? Do you think a kangaroo will fear a panda? Probably not. A panda probably will run away in front of a leg-kicking kangaroo.
This is what we will get all the time from, as people say, the panda huggers. I believe that the Chinese Communist Party's aim is to be dominant in this region and perhaps dominant in the world. And this is a zero-sum game. It must remove America from the Western Pacific in order to be dominant in this region. Simple as that.
Few have a handle on the strategic perils of the Taiwan issue, quite like Australia's former Major General, Jim Molan. A lot of experts are looking in the crystal ball at the moment, trying to figure out if and when there would be war over Taiwan. When do you think this is likely to all play out?
Fundamentally, given the power that they have now in their military, they could act any time from now on. And that's what frightens me more than anything.
So if a move on Taiwan does happen, how's it likely to play out? Jim Molan believes there are three likely possibilities.
The first scenario is what I call the incremental model. China places a blockade around Taiwan, a no-sail, no-fly blockade, says to Taiwan, OK, well, you can happily go bankrupt Taiwan, and let's see what the Americans do. Now, the Chinese can back off if the Americans come through with overwhelming force, which I don't believe they can. But until then, China may be able to achieve its aim without fighting. The second scenario is a sudden attack, a Pearl Harbor type attack, to take out all the American bases in Japan, in South Korea and in Guam. And then they turn around and say to Taiwan, well, what do you reckon, Taiwan? Do you want to be destroyed by us? The third model is to do them both.
The second China starts targeting US military assets, surely then it's a very slippery slope towards all-out nuclear war.
No, I don't believe that's the case. America would be foolish, even though it may have suffered a tactical defeat, to use nuclear weapons because it would start losing American cities.
It's a terrifying prospect, the two biggest powers in the world going toe-to-toe. But as you'll see, there are strong reasons to believe war is not as likely as some might think. A quarry on the northern outskirts of Melbourne seems an unlikely testing ground for the weapons of tomorrow. But here, a war game in miniature is underway.
3, 2, 1.
Defentex is a Victorian company developing autonomous drones for the battlefield. It's headed up by Travis Reddy, who believes these diminutive weapons could be a critical part of Australia's arsenal.
It's cheap, it's expendable, and can group together in a mass or a swarm so that we can have this big impact in the battlefield.
How much are your developments made for the sole purpose of helping a country with a small defence force like Australia take on a big force like China?
That's ultimately the reason that we exist.
Each tiny flying machine can carry a powerful payload.
It could be a smoke round, an anti-tank round, an anti-personnel round, a radio retransmission system.
But their real strength comes when they swarm in huge numbers. If you end up getting hundreds or thousands of these drones working together at one time, what can they actually achieve?
Yeah, they can have a devastating effect.
It's early days yet, but increasingly cheap autonomous drones are being viewed as a key to modern warfare, particularly for nations like Australia.
We're a very small country. We have a very small defence force. So we have to maximise the impact that every individual soldier can have.
So this could be a big tactical advantage for the little guy.
100%.
And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
Right now, of course, Australia's focus is on the much bigger military hardware that'll result from the AUKUS Pact. It'll be a couple of decades yet before the cementing of the relationship with our two most trusted allies results in shiny new nuclear submarines. Former Major General Jim Molan fears that's far too late.
It's excellent to have something out there in the future, 10, 20 years away. The question I've got is, what are we going to do for the next war? And the next war is not going to be 10 or 20 years away. It's going to be in the next 3 to 10 years. My estimate is in a serious fight, the Australian Defence Force only has enough missiles for days. This is not going to be resolved in days. And of course, we're not big enough. We should expand the Defence Force significantly.
It's a pretty bleak picture you paint. It sounds like we're stuffed.
I don't think being stuffed is a strategic word that I've used very often, but it's not bad. We should fund defence now based on our assessment of the national security strategy, which is based on the war that we want to win.
In short, you think Australia needs to prepare for war tomorrow?
Absolutely.
One thing is clear, while Australia's new subs will be nuclear powered, they won't be carrying nuclear warheads. But veteran Communist Party loyalist Victor Gao says Australia has already crossed the nuclear line.
I would say the AUKUS deal in itself, by enabling Australia to build nuclear submarines, will have one big consequence for Australia. That is, Australia will no longer enjoy the benefit and the very rare privilege of not being targeted with nuclear weapons going forward.
I think you're comparing oranges and apples there. Australia is doing a deal for nuclear-powered subs. They're not getting nuclear weapons. Why should Australia then be a target of nuclear weapons?
Listen to me. The tubes in a submarine can be armed with both nuclear warheads and conventional warheads. Now, in the heat of a battle or in the heat of a war, do you think Australia will allow inspection as to what kind of warhead you put into that big tube? I can bet you, in the heat of battle, no one will pause, and the safe approach is to target Australia as a nuclear-armed country.
Senior figures in China have said that because Australia has entered into the AUKUS agreement, that it is now a target for nuclear weapons. Do you think that's just bluff and bluster?
I would call that bluff and bluster in that category specifically.
From overseeing the most powerful naval fleet on Earth,
How we doing? Good to see you. Good to be
Richard Spencer prefers a quieter life these days. As former Secretary of the US Navy under Donald Trump, he watched China's military power and belligerence grow. But he's cautiously optimistic that tensions won't spill into all-out war.
You know, China, I don't believe, is quote-unquote looking for a fight specifically to fight. It wants to flex its muscles. But look what happened in the Cold War with Russia. I mean, we managed many hot friction points, and it never went to a kinetic state.
What do you mean by kinetic?
You start firing rounds downrange.
How likely do you think that is?
I would hope that that's a far probability because it does no one any good.
During the Cold War, mutually assured destruction prevented conflict as both sides feared the consequences of the other's nuclear arsenal. But Richard Spencer believes war will be prevented this time by a different threat of destruction: economic. In this modern, globalised world, China and the US are each other's largest trading partners, so in reality, highly dependent on each other.
It's a very interesting symbiotic relationship when you trade and have very meaningful commodities traded with your competitor. You can't simply cut the line. You can't simply have some sort of knee-jerk reaction without unintended consequences.
I guess that's where this situation is so unique compared to wars of past eras, because back then countries were self-sufficient, and now it is such a globalised economy that it's a completely different landscape. Completely different landscape.
Financially intertwined, trade intertwined. That matrix that you described right there, the complexity of it, I would say is the safety gate for, all-out war.
Australia's relationship with China is just as intertwined, and given that, the former head of the US Navy believes it might not be in our best interests to defend Taiwan militarily, even if we were morally opposed to any Chinese aggression. Is there an argument to say that perhaps it's not worth it for Australia and the United States to get involved in that?
I'm simply a citizen, but I would have to ask the question of my, government leadership: can we think long and hard about this? Knowing the scenarios, they're quite difficult. It would be a question that has to be asked.
Is it kind of a case of you don't want to get involved in a war that you know you're probably not going to win?
It's a very problematic situation in that regard. You have to think about what the results are at what cost.
But Jim Molan believes inaction could be even costlier for Australia.
Suppose we said, OK, Taiwan, well, you're on your own up there, and the Chinese snapped it up, and the Chinese started looking around the rest of the world, and they might snap up other liberal democracies like Australia. And we might then turn to America and say, America, well, could you give us a bit of a hand here? And the Americans might say what we said to Taiwan. Where do you draw the line? This situation that's developing now is an existential threat to Australia as a liberal democracy.
Hopefully that day of reckoning will never come, but there's no doubt we're living in perilous times. It's China's move now in this global game of chess, and everyone will be watching with bated breath to see what happens next.
China has no desire to preach to the Australians. We are, after all, the largest trading partners. We play it right. You will have the best of the two worlds. You will have the United States as your staunch ally. You will have China as your biggest, largest, ever expanding and always affordable market. Please don't fight. Don't pull the trigger. Let's make peace rather than make war.
So China is just a big, cuddly panda.
Well, China prefers peace rather than war. That's the key.
Hello, I'm Tom Steinfort. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au, as well as the 9Now app.